Winter has always been a time for gathering in the longhouse and sharing information around the fire. This is our contribution to that tradition.
Growing up, I was all about big blades, big buoys, splitting mauls, double-bitted axes. Man, I thought they were cool. And then I got in the Forest Service and spent 5 seasons using a tool 8-10 hours a day, and that reshaped my thinking. And that reshape can really be kind of summed up in one word, and that's efficiency. When you're in the backcountry, you want to be as efficient with your tools as you can be, because there's only a finite amount of energy that you have to put out, to use throughout that day. And anything that you can do to conserve your energy is a good plan and something you want to be looking for. And in tools, you can be more efficient in choosing the correct tool for a task, the way you set up your tool, and technique. So the first tool I want to talk about is probably one of the most misunderstood, and that's the saw. I've got 3 different variations here. The first thing to understand is hand saws fall down into 2 basic categories for the most part, and that's saws that cut on the push or saws that cut on the pull. The way it was explained to me, and this is 20 plus years ago at this point, is that the European saw style was a cut on the push and the Japanese saw style is cutting on a pull. And most of what you could get at that point was the European style, and a Japanese style saw was really hard to find, but far more efficient in my opinion. And that's simply because for most people a pull stroke is a more natural, smoother stroke, whereas pushing into it, you see I'm starting to get my shoulder rotating into it, I'm starting to get my body rotating into it, and that kind of thing, which to a certain extent is good because you're using your whole body and not just the muscles in your arms. But it's bad with the saw because the saw needs to move on a single direction. You don't want any twists or turns, because what happens is if you get those twists and turns, you get something called binding. And the thinner your saw blade is, the more you're going to get binding. So what's the problem with binding? If you're cutting and you get a bind and you're using a long enough saw, it can actually come back and hit your hand, it can come back and hit your arm, those kinds of things. And the other thing is, it's just wasted energy. Every time I'm pushing into it and bind, I got to stop and come back a little bit and re-push. Whereas if I can get that nice, smooth, easy pull back and forth with a saw, it's just a more natural stroke, and that's why I prefer it. The way that you can kind of tell how the saw is going to cut is looking at the direction of the teeth, and I'll lean forward so you can get a look at that. If you look at this, you can see that the teeth are sharpened on the back side rather than the front side, and that means that as I pull it through, those teeth are going to cut on the pull rather than a push. I only use Japanese saws for the most part. I just find them far more efficient, and this is the other factor with a saw. There is no more efficient way to separate 2 pieces of wood than a saw. Not only in the amount of energy that you have to expend, but also in the amount of wood that you use up. If you're using something like a knife or hatchet, tomahawk, what have you, to cut through a piece of wood, you need to start out wide and go to a V-cut. Whereas with my saw, I can cut right in there. So I'm not wasting this entire section of wood, which, yeah, you can pick it up and use it for various things like tinder and stuff, but I'd rather have the choice of how much wood I use and how I use that wood. So instead of cutting wide, I can cut precisely through. And like I said, it's also a far more efficient way to get through the wood, just energy wise. Now I've mentioned that there's 2 main types. I was fibbing a little bit. A lot of the 2-man hand saws, your cross cuts, your bigger bow saws, those kinds of things are actually hybrid. They cut on both a push and pull. And if you look at this blade on this bow saw, you can see that it's got alternating teeth sharpened on either side, which means that as I'm pushing through, it's going to cut, and as I'm pulling back, it's going to cut. Evan's a huge fan of bow saws. I like them all right, and here's why. Most bow saws come with a blade that is very fine, and as a result, it's really easy to get that bind that I was talking about earlier, especially on the push. Evan sources Swedish saw blades. They're thicker, they're heavier, and they're far less likely to bind. Now, if you have that kind of saw blade where it's less likely to bind, is it more efficient to be cutting on both push and pull? Yeah, it is. But sourcing those saw blades are not always the easiest thing to do. And the other reason I don't really carry a bow saw in the backcountry a ton is because it takes up more room. I have this saw versus this saw. Now again, the longer teeth, the longer bar, so to speak, on the blade is going to do more efficient because I can do fewer strokes. But I'm just not a huge fan of the way they work. Evan is. This is his chosen saw for carrying in his Jeep, and whenever we're going out into the backcountry with polks, this is the one that gets thrown in the polk. Because Evan's got such a preference for it, and I'm fine with it because it works well given this Swedish style blade. On the other hand, what I carry is, this is still, at the time, it was still relatively hard to find Japanese style saw blades, and so I picked this up fairly cheaply, and it's done well for me. It rides either in a pack really well, or I keep it in my Jeep most of the time. So those are kind of our two bigger saws. At some point I should probably spend the money and get something even bigger for the Jeep, but this stashes so easily that it just kind of stays in there. The one that we both carry, 24/7, always have one on our pack, is these Gerber slide out saws. I want to say they're about 4 ounces, somewhere in that neighborhood. They're robust, they've got a little bit heavier blades, they're less likely to bind, and it's easy to drop one into your pack without really noticing the weight or size. It's just a really compact tool. This is an always thing. Due to the efficiency of a saw, we both always carry one of these. The final thing I want to talk about with saws is safety. Saws make nasty cuts. Best case scenario, if you cut yourself with a saw, you're going to get a row of punctures on your hand, leg, whatever. Worst case scenario is you're going to get actually a jagged rip in your hand. And then the other thing is, you can see when I put these up to the cameras, there's wood on here, maybe some dirt from bouncing around the back of Evan's Jeep, or well, strapped in the back of the Jeep. But anyway, all that stuff's getting drugged through the wound and getting packed in there. So you get a dirtier cut, you get a more jagged cut. So when you're using a saw, the most common thing that I see is people will brace like this and then cut here. Where's that going to go if I get a bind, or if it actually comes out because I'm getting too aggro and jumps over? I've seen some nasty cuts on the back of thumbs, and you really don't want to get right here and jack that thumb up good, especially in the backcountry. So the easiest and safest thing to do is actually reach through and here. So if it does come out and pop up, it's hitting the back of my arm and not cutting me, rather than coming over here. If you can't reach through, try and get a limb. So again, it's hitting that limb, or literally fold over and brace. So if it does come over, you're hitting the side of your hand rather than getting up on that hand. So I recommend saws. I'm a huge fan of saws. Most of the time I don't use them, but when it comes time to use them, they're just so efficient. They're a must carry in the backcountry for me. That's my opinion, and I'm going to stick to it. I think anybody that's chopped through something 4, 6, 8 inches thick and saw through something 4, 6, 8 inches thick will agree with me that saws are the way to go. And like I said, I prefer the Japanese style. Evan likes bow styles, with the caveat that he always makes sure that he gets the thicker, heavy Swedish blade rather than the ones that come with most bow saws. The next thing I want to talk about is tomahawks, axes, hand axes, etc. The first thing to cover is what makes the difference between a tomahawk and a hand axe. Pretty simply, it's the way that the handle goes into the head. The handle on a tomahawk comes through from the top. As you can see, the width of the handle tapers all the way down. So as the head rides up on the handle, it gets what's basically a gravity or friction fit. That can be a good thing, because in the backcountry, it's far easier to whittle something if this gets broken that fits that eye than the axe style, which I'll get to in a minute. The other thing is that there are people who are actually pull that head off and use it for various things. They'll pull it off and use it as a hand skinner, an ulu. They'll slide it down halfway and use it as a draw knife, all those kinds of things. So, you know, tomahawks are good in that aspect. On the other hand, where do they fall down? Well, first is, if you look at the profile of that blade, you can see that it's got relatively narrow cheeks and then widens out very quickly. What that means is it's going to bite really deeply before it splits. So if you're using this for splitting, it means not until you get your blade this deep do you get that pop, and then it's going to explosively pop, which in my opinion is more work. The other thing that I'm not a huge fan about of tomahawks is the shape of the handle. Because it slides on from the bottom, you basically just have a straight taper. There's nothing to grab here at the end. It's just a smooth section. As you can see, this is Evan's tomahawk. As you can see, he's put on a cord wrap to give himself something to grip on, which kind of in a way negates the ability to move this, take this off and use it for other tasks. Evan doesn't do that, so he's fine with the trade out. A quick comment here is the cord he's used here is a real thin, light paracord. It's not rough to the texture, it's not grippy to the texture. I'm sorry, it is grippy, but it's not something that if you use it for a few hours is going to really raise blisters too badly. It will be worse than a standard tomahawk, standard axe handle, but it's not going to be terrible. I've seen people use a lot coarser materials. I just don't recommend that. But that's one of the reasons I personally don't like a tomahawk. On the other hand, the way a axe works is the head comes in, the handle comes in from the bottom and fits onto the head, and then is secured using either one single cross wedge that's plastic or wood, and then some metal wedges at angles. And basically what it's doing, instead of like a tomahawk where the blade gets thicker and then the gravity and swell is what makes it fit, you're using those various wedges to open that wood up and make it get a better fit. And that's why you use the single wedge that way and then the side wedges. Now, a little bit of comment on wedges. If you look here, you'll notice that when I rehafted this, I put the wedges in at an angle. You never want to use wedges or buy an axe that has wedges that are perfectly horizontal, because what that'll do over time is cause your splits down your grain here, because you can see the grain of my handle is running this way, and if I put a wedge in there like this, it's just going to cause a split. So that's one thing to look for if you're doing a axe, buying an axe or putting an axe head on. The next thing that I think is an advantage for a axe over tomahawk is, as you can see, it's got thicker cheeks. It's more of a wedge. It swells out quicker, and that means that I have to bite less deeply to get that split that I'm looking for. And in the backcountry, I use an axe far more for splitting than anything else, and so really I'm looking for something that's going to split pretty darn well. As far as handles, I'm going to jump over to my bigger axe here because it's a little easier to see. A traditional axe, unless it's a double bed axe or something like a Plasky where it's got blades on either side, is going to have this curve to it and come down into a pronounced curve here. The whole purpose of that is my hand, I don't need anything rough here. I don't need any texturing, because literally that lip is what holds that hand, or since I'm a righty, this hand in place. And so I don't have to have a good old roughed up section there to do that, because the shape of the blade handle itself holds it in place. So that's the number one reason really that I prefer axes over tomahawks, whether it be hand axes, full-size axes, is because the handle is far better shape ergonomically for holding your hand in place, and you don't have to add extra stuff to it. And then the benefit of being able to split, in my opinion, outweighs the extra weight savings of a tomahawk. The last thing I want to talk about is, as I was holding both these up to the thing, you'll see that we have pretty good edges on them. A lot of people will tell you that you really want a more rounded, less sharp edge. And by that I mean we prefer kind of a steeper, finer, if you will, sharp edge, and they want more of a round, more of a convex edge. And the thought process behind that is it's a more durable edge. It's not going to, the conventional wisdom goes, chip or fold if you're using it in harder woods. I prefer a sharper edge. I prefer less rounded, more of a V, and a sharp V at that, because I've simply found that it's both safer and more efficient for the same reason. A sharper V edge bites deeper. It's going to go deeper into the wood, so that means that I have to hit the wood far fewer times to get the same depth. The other thing that I found is that it's really easy to have so much of a convex edge, so much of a rounded edge on your chopping tool that it bounces, and bounces are dangerous. That's when it's going to bounce out of the wood, bounce into your leg if you're not using good stance. That's when it's going to just not work as efficiently. So we both run a steeper, more aggressive angle than a lot of people do, and I'll be honest, I haven't had any trouble with chipping. I haven't had any trouble with folding. Again, I am using good technique. I'm not chopping through into dirt where I might hit rocks. I'm not chopping into knots on trees. I'm using the tool efficiently and with good technique, and I've never had a problem with folds or that. So, my recommendation kind of goes counter to what a lot of people hold to be conventional wisdom, is that you need that more abrupt edge, because in my experience you don't. It's just not as efficient, and it's not as safe. Then the final thing, I know I said final a minute ago, but there's one thing that I kind of overlooked, and that's handle to blade or to head weight ratio. This is a Wetterling head, £1.25 pounds if I remember correctly, and it originally came on a fairly short handle. I want to say it was a 10 or 12 inch handle. Part of what I keep alluding to with efficiency and technique is bat speed. Basically the amount of torque that you can generate and get that head into the wood. The longer the handle, the more torque you can generate with less muscle. It's a matter of leverage. The old joke going, give me a long enough lever and a place to stand and I can move the earth. Well, it's kind of the same principle. I can use a far lighter head on a longer handle and do the same amount of work that I can with a heavier head on a shorter handle. And I'll tell you what, I'd rather lift a £1.5 pound head on a long handle multiple times than a 2 pound, 2.5 pound head on a short handle. So this is a 19 inch handle. The eye on this was counter to all the different handles that I could find, so I actually made this handle for the for this axe, and you can see that I kind of put in a little lip there. It'd be nice to have more, but with the thickness of the handle, that's what I could do. Likewise, you'll see that Evan's Tomahawk, I want to say 3/4 pound head, half to 3/4 pound head, but again a 19 inch handle, so that he's got that good leverage on there to generate speed, to generate impact. And this really is kind of the best bang for your buck, both weight wise and generating work wise. My holy grail, if there's any axe makers out there listening, I want a traditional axe head that weighs 3/4 pound on a 19 inch handle, traditional axe handle. I feel like that'd be pretty much ideal for an axe Tomahawk. So when do I carry an axe? The answer is I always have what is called a forester's axe. Small forest axe is actually a specific model, but basically a lighter head. I want to say this is about 2.5 pounds on a 22 inch handle. This is my heavy work, as it were, axe. This is what lives in the Jeep, and again, if we're going out and I know I'm going to be doing a lot of splitting, this is what gets thrown in the polk or even strapped to a pack. So this is what I go to when I know I'm going to be doing heavy work. So obviously not something I carry all the time. Obviously something that I'm only going to carry if the potential comes that I need to move something to get my Jeep through, or if I'm going to be doing a lot of splitting on the trail. This here, as I said, Wetterling head, rehafted on my handle, and looks like I got a little toe down. The axe is really a subject that we could go into for hours. How to choose them, how to hang the head, all those kinds of things really do matter. But the fact of the matter is, I don't really carry an axe that often. This gets put into the pack at the same time my snow shovel goes in for that winter use. Again, snow shovel, not something I use all the time, but when I need it, I need it. And I'm kind of the same way with an axe. Not something I use on every trip, hardly ever use one as a matter of fact, but when I do want to start to have the ability to split wood to get at the inner drier areas, or split rounds down to get them in the fire, into the stove, an axe really is the most efficient way to do it, in my opinion. So I will add this to my pack seasonally. So not an always carry thing, seasonal when it's on my back weight wise. I guess I'm going to talk a little bit too about things to look for in an axe, because it is kind of important. Good axe brands: Granford's Brooks, Wetterling, Husqvarna turns out some good axes. This is Tomahawks or Two Rivers Hawks. Oh, sorry, no, H&B. H&B Forge does good tools. Two Rivers Hawks does good tools, I've seen. But basically, in all the cases, you want to look for some basic things. The fact of the matter is, there's not a single brand turning out a axe that I will buy sight unseen anymore. Back before Granford's Brooks got really popular, they were smaller, they were turning out fewer axes, and I would buy one sight unseen, but I've seen too many now that just have some issues. And what you want to do, the first thing you want to do, is sight down the blade of the axe and see how it is in reference to the handle. You basically want the blade, the edge, to be perfectly in line with the handle. If your handle's got a twist or a turn in it, it's just going to lead to inefficiency in chopping and eventually cause a break in that handle. The next thing you want to look for is grain. You want the grain running not perfectly in line with the head, because that impact slowly over time is going to do that. You want it to go against the head. And then the last thing you want to do is make sure that the head is level with the handle. It's not toed down or toed up, because that's going to cause that head, when you're chopping, to strike either toed down or toed up, and it's just not as efficient. You don't get that whole impact, you're getting a partial impact, and then it also can cause the head to dig a certain way or dig away from you. Both of which are just not ideal. They're not as efficient energy wise. So you want to try and make sure that the blade is parallel to the handle. So those are kinds of the things, basic things that you want to look for in an axe when you're picking it out. I've looked at a lot of axes. I've bought very few over the years, just because anymore, and the biggest issue is handles, we just don't have good wood anymore. People aren't turning out that really good wood to haft axes with. Pulaski's, whatever handles you're talking about, and it's growing harder and harder to find a good handle, almost to the point where you want to buy a head and then haft it yourself using a selected handle. When I joined the Forest Service, there was two different axe or Pulaski handles that we used. One was larger, more of a long oval, and boy, I thought it felt good in my hand, versus the other one, which was a shorter, a little bit fatter, more rounded oval. And so I immediately grabbed that bigger, thicker handle. But what I found was that because it was thicker in length and not in width, that it really transferred all the impact to the palm of my hand. And it made it more work, because I was constantly getting that jarring impact to my hand. Whereas with the shorter round oval, the fatness was in the width rather than length. And while it didn't feel quite as good in the hand without using, boy, there was a huge difference, because it just put the impact over a wider portion of my palm, and so I wasn't constantly pounding the back there, and it just made it easier for me to use it all day long without that hand fatigue that went along with the other handle. So those are a few things to look for when you're buying an axe. Nothing rocket science, but they can make a big difference both in the use and the life of your axe, tomahawk, whatever you do. Tomahawks, same things. Look for the same things. The knife is ubiquitous, the axe less so. And my personal thoughts behind that is that really axes come into their own in hardwood environments, and there's far more people still living in cultures with the land in jungle, equatorial environments than there is hardwood environments. And number two, and this is probably the most important one and what I should have led off with, making a knife is far easier than making an axe, because you don't have to form an eye. You have to form the blade, you have to sharpen it, you have to put a handle on it, and that's kind of it. Whereas with axes, you've got to form the eye, cheeks, all that kind of stuff, so it's more complicated. That being said, going back to my main uses of a knife in the backcountry, I typically don't carry a big blade. So why don't I carry a big blade? Again, it comes down to efficiency. I find that a axe chops far better than a knife chops, and that's simply because of where the weight is concentrated on an axe. Again, have Evans HB Tomahawk here. If you look at these two different tools, here's the longest knife I have, you'll see that all the weight in the Tomahawk's actually out here at the end. This bolo style knife does have a swell, a weight forward design it's called, to put more of the weight in that chopping area, but it's not going to be able to rival the weight centered here with this long handle, because it carries all the weight here with very little weight here and gives me more leverage, whereas this has weight spread throughout the entire grip of the handle. So again, I find an axe far more efficient a chopping tool. And then from there, it's all a matter of weight. Rather than try and memorize these, I went ahead and put all these different tools that I've got here on the postal scale before I came. And actually the lightest knife that I have with me is this Spyderco. This is kind of my choice for a big blade when I do carry a big blade. It's not all that long, but it's got a nice weight forward design, and it does chop well. And the biggest benefit to it is it's only 1 pound 8 ounces. Moving up from there, this Kershaw Outcast, this Walter Moran Rio Grande Bowie, and actually this HB Forged Tomahawks are all within 2 ounces of each other. They all go from 1 pound 12 ounces up to 1 pound 14 ounces for the Bowie. So that means that not only do I get better chopping characteristics, that this is actually the exact same weight as those two bigger knives. So why would I carry something that doesn't chop as well at the same weight? Now, the question between the Spyderco and this hawk, again, I'm at a weight difference of 4 ounces, 1/4 pound. So not insignificant. A 1/4 pound for me is really where I start looking to cut weight, and I'm willing to do it. That being said, this is going to chop so much better than this. In my experience, I'm going to go for the Tomahawk for the extra 4 ounces. Moving up from there to the Wetterling. This is a tough decision. Again, I'm at 1 pound 8 ounces. With my custom Wetterling that I made, I'm at 2 pounds 2 ounces. So there's 10 ounces difference between these two different tools. Again, all of this, or the vast majority of it's in this head. That being said, I can use better chopping technique. I've got far more leverage and I've got the weight balanced where I'm chopping. This is what I typically carry in the backcountry during the winter, just because I know it's a better chopper and splitter, which when it comes to processing firewood is key. Now if I'm really weight conscious, really want to cut weight because of the certain trip I'm going on or where I'm headed, I will carry this knife. But I know that I'm not using it so much as a straight chopper, but I'm using it as a blade that I'm going to baton with. And you know, that's again, where in there does weight fall? Am I going to carry 4 extra ounces to have the Tomahawk? Kind of a no-brainer for me. Am I going to carry 10 extra ounces to go all the way up to a wetterling? That's really a judgment call. You know, when I weighed them this morning, kind of had me thinking, maybe I should go back to carrying the Spyderco in my pack. And you know, that's something I'm going to think about. But I know how much better this wetterling chops than the Spyderco, that for sheer ability to process wood in the backcountry, I don't know. I'm still leaning towards carrying the extra weight. So that kind of sums it up. We started out talking about what you want to look for in tools. Make sure that you are carrying an efficient tool. By that I mean less weight, more leverage, or the correct tool for the job, as in the case of the saw. Saws, extremely efficient, very limited in use because all they do is cut like a saw, but their efficiency to weight ratio, just, they're a no-brainer in my opinion. I always have them in my pack. Axes, kind of a one-dimensional thing. They do what they do very well. Again, more efficient chopping than a knife, but there's going to be some weight penalties. That being said, they're generally not worth the weight to carry, in my opinion, other than when you know that you're going to be processing wood. Maybe if you're doing some batoning, some stuff like that, think about a longer knife. But in those cases, not sure that you're not generally better off going to an axe, because they're more efficient, and really a lot of big blades weigh as much as an axe or close enough that it doesn't matter. The final thing I want to say is be safe out there. You know, we're talking about tools that cut, and keep your blood on the inside, not the outside. That's the best way to think about it, and what you should be going for. So get out and enjoy it, but be safe. Thank you.